Welcome to Your American Dream. I'm Anisha Jennings, and today we have a very special guest. Her name is Susan Leger-Ferraro. She's a passionate, award winning social entrepreneur and best selling author, having founded and led five multi million dollar organizations dedicated to transforming workforce education while promoting social impact. With her first company founded at age 17, Susan has 45 years' experience with a focus on youth activism as a wisdom point for today's global market. Susan has received many awards and accolades, including US Massachusetts Women in Business Champion, Chamber of Commerce Business of the Year, and Chevron's Dorothy Terrell Community Impact Award, to name a few. Her innovative ideas continue to inspire transformation in communities and organizations across the globe, with more than 50,000 trained in the SuperLoop movement. Susan's most precious role is being mom to her three sons and Gigi to six grandkids who all reside in the greater Boston area. Welcome, Susan. Thank you so much for being on my show today.
Absolutely, Anisha. Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate the opportunity to share.
Yes, thank you. So tell us all about Susan. There's so much. We have 45 years to unpack in less than 30 minutes. So tell us about your journey from, when you started at 15, you're a granddaughter of an immigrant, and tell us about your early life being a granddaughter of an immigrant and raising three boys and now being a grandmom. With your book, with your activism, how do you do it all? And tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, great questions, Anisha. So, I love that you're focusing on really the ancestry of where we're coming from, And although, as I shared, my grandmother, Yvonne DeRozier at the time, and Yvonne Ledger came over from Canada at 15. And she was the oldest of nine siblings and ended up she moved to Fitchburg, Massachusetts, which is out in a little bit in Western Massachusetts, and, brought all of her siblings, her mom and dad down, right, and moved everybody here at 15. When you think about that, that was in the 90s when she did that.
Wow.
And it's just like, it's amazing. And yet, my dad and my mom grew up in Lawrence, Massachusetts. Her parents were Canadian as well. And then my dad ended up moving to Methuen, Massachusetts, and that's where my mom and dad met. And so that's where I was born and raised, in Methuen, Massachusetts, which is, a city now. It was a town.
Yes.
And we actually just opened our first Methuen Youth and Community Center there, which is focused on activism, youth activism, arts, culture, theater, expression, and workforce development. And what I love about this particular model is that we assigned a My Voice Youth Community Advisory Group. And so It's made from 21 sixth grade to 12th grade students in the greater surrounding communities and the greater Methuen area. And we are teaching them and working with them, and they are teaching us what it is to collaborate with youth and adults, and how do we come together in an integrated, inclusive fashion where we can hear their voices and they can hear our voices. I think that is one of the end results of my journey and my adventure. But, I went through the same type of at Methuen High School career technical education program, which was in early childhood. So as a junior and senior, I was in the program as a freshman and sophomore. It was a full day program, understanding about child development. And I had a great mentor, Dr. Denise Betterhall, who really supported my enthusiasm. And then I got the ability to do what they called at the time work study, and only go to school half days as a junior and senior, and leave at 11:30. The first year I worked in a kindergarten,
Nice.
The entire afternoon, it was unpaid at the time, but realized that that was not for me. There was a lot of intensity amongst the teachers even back then. And I thought, not really about as much as about the kids as I thought it would have been. Right?
Yes.
Some things have never evolved since then, I will tell you that. And then I did a year working at a KinderCare. And that was when I realized, wow, there's a cool opportunity to be working with children and families. So I graduated high school at 17 years old. And although I was accepted at, several full-time colleges to do the full year program, Wheelock College in Boston, the University of Maine, some really great education schools, I decided to start my first business, a family daycare home called Little Sprouts Child Enrichment Centers at 17 years old. And in most states, you cannot get licensed to be a provider until you're 18. And so I am still the youngest person that was ever given a license in the state of Massachusetts at 17. And the reason that happened was because my mentor, Denise Benahal, advocated for me. She spoke with the licensing agency and wrote a testimonial saying that, this girl has gone above and beyond, her grades are great. And so, they listened and allowed it. And as a result of that, I opened up, Little Sprouts Child Enrichment Centers. I had 6 kids. I think I was making maybe $20,000 a year, working, more than 12-hour days because we were open from 6 to 6. And in that time, and again, the kindness of other people, Anisha, right? So I'm, not necessarily, I'm an introvert. Okay. And most people wouldn't know that about me.
Yes.
Right.
We wouldn't.
Right. If you look at the things up, but I very much am so. I'm very, internal about how I regulate myself. And when I'm out with too many people, I really get overstimulated. So I get to manage that. And so I didn't have a lot of experience in the community. Really, a real estate friend of mine who was interested in what I was doing in early childhood. And when I was looking for apartments, she was helping me. Her name is Sandy Lebowitz, and she was a real estate agent in the city of Lawrence. And she said to me, do you know anything about real estate? And I'm like, no, not at all. And she engaged me with a volunteer service that is still around under the U.S. Business Administration, right? The Small Business Administration, called SCORE. And SCORE is retired, entrepreneurs and business people that help mentor younger business people. And so these 2 retired people, a woman and a man, I don't remember their names, came to my rented family daycare home and taught me about equity.
Wow.
I had no idea, and what they basically said that made sense to me was, Susan, you're paying $750 a month rent. Okay. If you own this property, that money would be considered almost as a savings account. And if you wanted to borrow against it to grow your business, that would allow you to do that. And I was like, I get that. That sounds genius, right? So at that point, I asked my mother and father if I could move the business back into their house because they were literally down the street from me. And I tell in the book, SuperLoop, that, I was so young, Anisha, that I used to go home most nights and sleep at home because I was afraid to sleep by myself.
Oh, yeah.
In the apartment. And so my parents allowed me, crazy enough to move the whole business into their house. So, 5 days a week, my dad would be getting up. He was an engineer at Charles Stock Draper Lab in Cambridge. The 6 kids would be in his kitchen eating breakfast at their little table. He'd be at the grown-up table, right? So I ran that business and I saved all I could. I worked 3 jobs. So I got another job 2 nights a week. And then I worked I saved $15,000 in 15 months. And I bought my first property, my first physical house at 19 years old. And I started what became our real estate company called Peace, Love, and Happiness Real Estate.
Lovely. My goodness. That is such a powerful story, and all that our parents do for us. And we can't even imagine the sacrifices and everything they do to give us a better life. So thank you for sharing about how, you started and you were always driven, motivated, and you did all of this. What was your early childhood like? Was it because of, how hard your parents worked as immigrants, or how did that work ethic, how did you cultivate that work ethic? What drove you to be ambitious, wanting more, wanting to grow, wanting to, leave all the colleges that you did get into and just start a daycare?
Yeah. My grandmother, Yvonne, that came over in Canada, lived in the same house as me, right? So we had it was a 2-family, and she lived upstairs. So when I moved into the house and was running that, she was still there. They, up until she passed when she was 74, she was teaching aerobics, volunteering at the senior center, right? So, her sisters, all of them still lived around. Very hard work ethic, right? On my mom's side, her dad, same thing, very hard work ethic. My mom and dad, right? My mom was a stay-at-home mom. She worked when my sisters all went to college so that she could get extra income. But, everything was, if you're going to do it right, if you're going to do the job, do it right. Right.
Yes.
My life. And so those type of principles that were just inculcated in me at a very early age. And I think also the freedom to be able to do different things. When I wanted to do the CTE program, it wasn't like, Susan, you really shouldn't do that. Get more academic credits. They supported my desire to one, be working at such a young age because
Yes.
I loved the idea of making my own money. So I started, I had a paper route when I was 10 years old.
Wow.
And then I had other jobs all the way then, and they always supported. They would get up early in the morning, because one of them was I worked at Dunkin' Donuts. And so I would need to be there at like 5 in the morning, and my
Wow.
dad would up and drive me there. And they were very supportive about our commitment to make, contribution in the community, because we also did a lot of volunteering at our, church, because we went to private Catholic school for our first 8 years. And so, yeah, for sure, it was something that, and still is, right? My mom and dad still very much, have that mindset of, if you're going to do something, do it right.
Absolutely. So what happened after? So after you started your business, you ran your business and you did real estate, did you ever think about, I got to go back to college, or I should get some credentials? How did that pan out? And what was the next journey in your career?
Yeah, a great question. Actually, I went to college nights almost immediately. I graduated in 1982, and so I waited until the following September in 1983. I started taking courses at the local community college because,
Wow.
obviously at that time there was no online, no World Wide Web, right? So it was in person. And so I would work all day long and then go to school at night.
Wow.
So I started taking those courses, and then I did a few summer institutes that Wheelock College used to offer. And Wheelock College was just recently, a little bit pre-COVID, acquired by Boston University. So they're now part of BU. And so I did a 3-week immersion program that gave me the credits that I needed to become director certified and run my own school, early childhood school in the state of Massachusetts. So I needed a certain amount. I think it was 36 credits at that time. And so I was just working towards that so that when I wanted to apply for that license, I would have the credentials.
Amazing. Amazing. So you've been in the business for so long. I would say, 30 years of your business journey. And then,
Oh, no. I mean, that was 1982. So for almost 50.
50. Yeah. So how did it evolve? How did things change, before the World Wide Web and after? And how did you go through all the changes? And how did, education itself change over these past years?
The early childhood industry, for better or for worse, Anisha, is still a very archaic industry. I will tell you that if you would have told me when I was in high school in the late 70s, getting into this field, that in 2025, that the entire field would not have evolved as much as it did, would still not be an integrated part of our public school system, I would not have believed it. And unfortunately, so many other countries are surpassing what we're doing because they have, in the Netherlands, in France, in Japan, and, most of the other developed countries, early childhood is now part of your educational right and not a nice to have,
Right.
because of what we know about brain science and neuroplasticity of the brain.
Yes.
There's so much research out there about, the first 1,000 days in a child's life, and that is when the most brain development happens. And we have not taken that science and that data seriously, not integrated it into our public school system as part of what we offer as an educational experience. And so it's still a business market. Early childhood is still under, what you would consider business market. And, you have a child, right? Early childhood education and paying for it is astronomical.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
In
Indeed.
the Boston market right now, for an infant, it is between $35,000 and $40,000 a year on average.
Yes.
At a Bright Horizons or a KinderCare. I mean,
Yes.
it doesn't work for the parents and families. And I will just add this piece in there, Anisha, to our listeners, to your listeners, is that, in September of 2024, the Surgeon General came out with a declaration for the first time in our lifetime, acknowledging that parenting was a social and public health crisis.
Oh, wow.
Right? And it got brushed under the rug because of all the other drama that was going on in the country with the election and all of the infighting and the chaos. But the reality was, if you look at that data and that research that he put out, he was basically looking at multiple studies stating that parenting was one of the foundational reasons for depression and mental health issues in adults that were working parents, and that they did not feel successful as parents. They didn't feel successful in their jobs, and they didn't feel successful in their partnership with their marital or life partner.
Yes, makes sense.
And that is a public health crisis.
Yes, that makes so much sense. So,
exactly.
What would be your advice for, young parents of young children? Like, there's this whole thing about screens and no screens. And if you don't give the screens, how do you get your work done? And sometimes it's like, I don't want to go through this chaos. So here's a screen. Let's just, you get 30 minutes of screen. We get 30 minutes of whatever we need to cook or clean or eat our dinner in peace or something like that. So how do we navigate these kind of situations, and in the times where both parents need to work and one parent can't be with the child all the time? What would be your few ideas or suggestions that you may have on how we can navigate this phase?
Sure. And that's a big question, and it sounds very personal for you, right? Because you're right going through it right now. So what we don't want to be doing is shaming parents.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So we start there. We do know, we have done, G3 Works, which is my current company, and my previous company, Imagine That, which was an out of school youth time organization, and then Little Sprouts, which was the early childhood organization. I've done years of development projects as a development partner with PBS and WGBH, which are the largest media producers of children's educational content in the world.
Yes.
And had the great gift of it being in my backyard in Boston. And so got to do a lot of cool projects. I got to meet, the Sesame Street characters, the Between the Lion characters, all of them. So,
lovely.
So what's cool about it is we have a lot of good data about screen time and the type of screen time that actually is best for children. And so in general, what we know is that every age it changes, but you really don't want more than 2 hours a day where you have screen time happening on a tablet, especially with younger children.
Yes.
So that's one. And it's also curating the content, letting them watch endless YouTube videos, right? Is not it. Look at something that has educational value to it.
Yes.
There's a lot of great apps out there right now that are educational apps that help with executive function, that are helping them with, their literacy and STEM capabilities. And so looking at the right types of content that are something that is going to add value. There's a lot of PBS programs like Between the Lions that was about literacy. There was Peep in the Big Wide World that was about STEM. There is, they have a lot of really good content, and there's a lot of good apps out there. And then what we recommend to parents is that you don't just leave it at that, that you ask some curious questions about their time, right? And even if it's 3 questions, Anisha, right, to help you connect with them, like, so tell me what you learned when you were on, the app today, looking at, Daniel the Lion, right? Tell me what he taught you about, friendships. What did you not like about that episode?
Right.
So the ability to engage with our children around the content so that there is adult-child interaction that gives it contextual meaning is what now creates it into a social learning opportunity.
Absolutely. Makes sense. So it was definitely a challenge because we tried to keep our son away from screens for 2 years. So the only screen time he had was video call with his grandparents. But besides that, we tried to not give him any screen time. And it was such a challenge because if we went somewhere, like, if we were visiting and there's screens and it's like, it's so hard. And it's not to say that, if people have using screens to help their children or that's their form of parenting, that it's wrong. It's not wrong. It's just whatever works for your family is what you do, right? So with all your years of experience now with working with children and youth, how do you think the content has changed, and how has development changed, and what advice would you give for, how can we equip our young generation to be bold and to conquer the world, basically?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to flip this on its head, the question that you just asked me, which is this, Anisha. I have spent my, part of my life service in education working on behalf of children and families and communities, right? But what I learned very, very early on in my career, really in my early 20s, was that it was not the children that were going to be the challenge. It was going to be the grown-ups.
Yes.
Okay. So most of my life's work is actually about organizational development, about professional development, specifically around transformation, executive function, effective communication. So what I have learned, right, yes, is that us being supportive to the grown-ups in the child environment, yes, whether it's the parents, the grandparents, or the educators, or the community members, right? That's where the wisdom point is. It is not marginalizing the parent support, the parent engagement, and understanding, just like you so eloquently said, is that every family is different. And when we see people that may have a 2-year-old and they're allowing them to watch content on their phone, it's not about shaming them, absolutely, and giving them some kind of look, or it is about respecting that we have no idea what's going on in that family's life.
Absolutely.
And they may just need a break. And connecting back to what the Surgeon General said about parenting being at a mental health crisis, that us supporting each other as adults and helping each other, not complaining about each other when we're on planes and children are there, because it shames the parents, okay? Right? When we're standing in line at the grocery store and the child has a temper tantrum and is having meltdown all over the floor, okay? That is developmentally appropriate.
Yes.
We don't like it as adults, but that's what children do. They act out, right? But what we do is we start rolling our eyes, backing off, and it shames the parents.
Right. Okay. And society has conditioned it to be like that. Like,
exactly,
if your child is having a tantrum or rolling on the floor, you're a bad parent. You're not doing your job. You're not disciplining. But at the same time, it's like, it's just a challenge no matter what. And everybody's just trying to do their best. So it's a hard...
It is. And if you travel the world, what I will tell you is, a year and a half ago, I spent a month in Africa, South Africa, Nigeria, and then Ghana.
Wow.
I have spent a lot of time in Cuba. And the reason that I went originally to spend time in Cuba was because Cuba, most people don't know this, has a 97% literacy proficiency score upon graduation.
Wow.
Do you know what the average is in the United States?
Nope.
Okay. So in general, across the board, it's on average 66% reading proficiency when they graduate high school.
Oh my, wow.
In lower socioeconomic system impacted communities, in some of them that I work in, it is in the high 30 percentile.
Wow.
Okay. So think about that. For every 100 children that graduate high school as seniors, only on average 66 of them can read at grade level.
What is it that we can do? What is the disconnect? What can we as parents or as a community do to help our children through their early development? And, I don't know, I just feel like, how can we support them?
Right. So the model that I will tell you in Cuba that I found so fascinating, and I was able to make some good connections down there. A good friend of mine, who now lives in Miami, Eduardo Martinez, got me into the Cuban public schools. And so I work in them, get to sit in them and observe and speak to the teachers. And essentially what they're doing differently than what we do, Anisha, is that they are doing 3-generational learning in the entire country.
Wow.
So not only are they teaching new math, quote unquote, to the students, but they send home information and tools and paperwork for the parents and the grandparents.
Oh, wow.
So that they understand it as well. And so that's the opportunity, is where we're exposing our children to new technology, to new tools, to new ways of doing math and reading, but we're not taking the time to also train the parents and families so that it is a united, connected circle.
Right.
And that's a big opportunity for families to understand, how do I best support my child so that they're getting those tools. And whether that's additional work, whether it's, media content, whether it's, reading certain content that's going to have those principles and theories in them, that is a way that we can forward the work. And at the very basis of it, Anisha, I will tell you, is asking good, curious questions, right? Not telling the child, but always in the habit of discovery, so that they can discover it for themselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right?
That is so well said. Sometimes it gets so overwhelming when it's like, why? But why? But why? But why? But, to just be in the moment and enjoy that and have the patience to answer those questions, because I know my dad did that for me when I was a child. I would always ask questions, and till today, that is what it stands out to me, that my dad never said, shut up, or stop asking questions, or just go do your thing, even though like I grew up in the 80s. I'm an 80s child, so he always answered my questions with patience, and that's what helps me now. And it has definitely helped me keep a curious mind towards everything. Like, I don't take anything that's just said to me. I will ask, why is it like this? Why can't it be different? So yeah, that's definitely very, very helpful.
Which is your dad doing that for you, Anisha, grew your brain development.
Absolutely.
It grew your synapses. It grew the connections in your prefrontal cortex to continue to learn better, to hold on to information, right? Executive function, working memory. It gives you, right, impulse.
Absolutely.
Control helps with that. And, cognitive flexibility, the ability to understand that two things can be true at the same time. And so those attributes of executive function are critically important. And it's as simple as taking the time to be in discovery with your child. And it means don't answer everything for them. Help them. Curious. And to your point, you are still curious as a result.
Absolutely. So also, I know of some parents who are teenage parents, and there's just so many challenges. It doesn't matter what stage of life your kids are, whether it's an infant, it's a toddler, it's a teenager. There's always different challenges for the parents. What would be your advice to parents who go through this, in generally whatever stage the kids are in? What is your advice for them to stay sane as much as possible through this parenting journey?
Staying in relationship with your child and meeting them where they're at is important. As we have learned about the science and behaviors that create places where belonging matters, where equity matters, where inclusion matters. And, I'm not getting into this political conversation. I mean, from a humanitarian standpoint, to make sure that we're doing that with our children and helping them feel okay. The diversity amongst our youth, with all of the gender identity, with all of the sexuality identity that is going on, I didn't have to deal with that, right? So much with my generation, right? You're all going to have to deal with that. And as a Gigi, right? I'm dealing with it now, right? With that kind of fluidity and wondering, should I be thinking about that? Maybe am I this, And so because it's in the space now, informing yourself, understanding what to do when that comes up, because the other really tough point is there are more children in the school system, preschool and elementary and middle school, on medication right now than ever before for something on the spectrum disorder, right? That's one. In the world, teen suicide, since COVID is going up all the time, In the book, in SuperLoop, I talk about it as these two scientists coined this term that they're now tracking called deaths of despair. Dying by suicide, by addiction, by overdosing, Alcoholism, addiction, and then overdosing. Those three things are going up unbelievably in the United States, and even higher among Black and brown teens more than white teens. So it is critically important to understand this is not a little thing, right? We have an epidemic going on, and all it takes is grounding ourselves, staying connected, being good listeners, knowing your child's friends and communities where they hang out, being involved in their lives so that they feel safe, psychologically safe to share with you because most of the time adults are in the process of their own unfinished healing and they're taking it out on their child instead of doing their own personal
That's so
work
true.
and being able to show up fully.
Yes.
So that's the opportunity that we have as a society and as families and parents and educators.
That's so true. Because an example of this, I mean, it's not a terrible example, but, we want our kids to do something that we were not able to achieve or something like that, right? Like the pressure builds. And then now it's like, or we want to give them something that we didn't have. And then that gives some other, like, say you didn't have a lot as a child. Now you're in a better position to have materialistic things. So now you're loading your child or your grandchild with gifts, and that builds a different, it has its own repercussions. So having to draw those boundaries and lines and just, staying in connection, like you mentioned, is so important.
Yeah.
So tell us about your book. What can readers take away from that? And, what do we look forward to? That looks amazing.
This book is a compilation of, 45 plus years of my own life, my own leadership, the great mentors that I have had the amazing opportunity to work with. I think I shared with you that when we spoke last that, I was introduced to Dr. Stephen Covey, who wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People a year before he launched his book. I think it was 1988 when I met him. And so I got to work with their community and with him to create some of the youth content and how they brought down 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens to be accessible to youth, So it was preparing me for what I was going to be in life, right? He ended up introducing me to Dr. Deepak Chopra and Dr. David Simon that were starting and launching the Chopra Center in the mid to early 90s down in San Diego. I got to work with them. And so now I've got, experience with an amazing person who designed, what I would call conscious business leadership, right? 7 Habits is about responsible and accountable business leadership. And then, Deepak and their methodology is really about consciousness, self-regulation, and, well-being in general, mental, physical, and emotional. And so I integrated all of these theories and got to work with, Gallup while I was out in New York, because I lived in New York for 4 years, looking at this. So it is taking all of these different leadership methodologies, models, and creating what I believe, and I've actually used in all of my businesses and with our clients, systems and processes and teachings, praxis that helps us understand how to operationalize consciousness. How do we, on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, quarter-to-quarter, annualized basis, right, really capture human potential and maximize performance? And, a lot of these philosophical principles are woven into the methodology. And so we have, many KPIs and systems and processes to practice authentic communication. How do you have a challenging conversation? How do you practice healthy conflict?
Yes,
right?
yes, indeed.
Right side of a business.
That is so important.
Yeah. And most of us are really adverse to it, right? We don't have good examples. So we have created processes and learning and teachings that help us do this on a regular basis, because what we know about adult learners is that just like children, consistent dosage and high repetition helps us unlearn something, right?
Absolutely.
And then restructure what it is that we need to do. So that's really what most of us are doing. We have to discover, where was the breakdown and trauma in my life that got me stuck in these ways of being and how I show up, whether it's fight, flight, freeze, diссociate, or appease, right? Because those are part of our coping mechanism. And how do I become more aware of it? Build a community that's going to give me feed forward and call me forward on doing something different, and a place where I know that these systems and processes are going to be supported. So the book, has multiple case studies in there. Actually, the Chopra Center is one of them, because I did training there for that entire team for several years. And my experiences of, even in highly conscious business models, how tough it is to be consistently practicing self-accountability, peer-to-peer accountability, organizational accountability. And then how do we use KPIs to move things? What do we think about financial literacy to make sure that everybody in the systems understands what's a profit and loss statement? What is a cash flow? Why does it, right? So all of these things that seem like they don't go together, they do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And also to your statement of, communication is so much important and being involved in your child's life. And it doesn't matter what age they are, just having that clear communication. And if your child comes to you with a problem and says, hey, this is where I'm struggling, to try and have a healthy conversation with them rather than just shutting them out and then pretending just nothing happened. That is a very hard place to be. So before we wrap up, I have one last question for you. So for people and kids on the spectrum, those who are dealing with ADHD, ADD, OCD, how do you what would be your suggestion for motivation? Because sometimes it's like you're neurotypical, you are self-motivated. It doesn't matter. You're gonna, even if you're knocked down, you're gonna get up and go do it. Oh, because you're so motivated, you keep doing stuff, and then things pile up on the neurotypical person and they get burdened and overwhelmed when they are trying to support, say, neurodivergent partners or children, or it's a family setting, right? So what would be your advice on how do you draw a balance? How do you support someone, whether it's a teenage child with ADHD or it's a spouse or someone who's neurotypical supporting someone who's neurodivergent? How do you balance this kind of relationship? How can you support your child, and whether as a grandparent, as a parent, or as an aunt, how do you support your, the younger generation?
Yeah, sure. No, it's a great question, Anisha. And really, as there are more people that understand the diagnoses of anything, ADD, ADHD, oppositional defiance disorder, PDD, dyslexia, all of them, right? They are all, now considered on the spectrum. Okay. And there are varieties of them. What I recommend people to think about is, yes, if you have a diagnosis, that is not a life sentence, right? Because what we know about epigenetics, right, is that those diagnoses it's information, but with good interventions, right, whether that is, any type of, PT, OT, any of those specialists that you may be working with. It's also understanding that as you lean into your executive function and you build your capacity for cognitive flexibility, for inhibitory control, right? Really controlling your impulses. That is also one of those characteristics that tend to show up more, to your point, of, neurodiverse populations, right? So what I will tell you is anything and everything that you can do that is going to develop capacity in your executive function is going to help with that. And at a minimum, having conversations collectively. If your child is 2 years old, 5 years old, 15 years old, collaboratively deciding, okay, this is what works and this is what doesn't work. We're going to lean into this. Now, I have 2 sons that have diagnosis, right? I have dyslexia, so I am also on the spectrum. And it's only been in the last few years that dyslexia is actually considered on the spectrum, right? But it is now. And because it's not just about reading backwards, it's also about understanding mapping and logical sequential thinking. I don't have that at all. So writing this book for me was almost physically painful to discipline myself to do it. But because I know about epigenetics, I know that the more that I do it for myself, the more I'm going to prune off my own synapses. I'm going to build new ones that are going to give me new patterns of behavior for myself, right? But I'm grown up and you're asking about children, right? And so back to why inclusion matters, right? People and children and adults support what they help create. So you want to be collaborative about, if you have a child that, has a really hard time, doesn't like doing homework, you make an agreement. We're going to agree that you're going to come home from school. You're going to have a snack. You're going to go play outside for an hour. And at 5 p.m., you're going to come in and you're going to do this, right? And they push back and say, no, I'd rather do it this way. You want to give them agency into what they're doing so that they have ownership.
Right.
so that they accept it. And so as much as you can, again, it's about collaborative inclusion and making these agreements together. And there's a significant amount of people that their life partner, their spouse also is neurodivergent. So they're dealing with their spouse and their child, right? That they're trying to manage around that. And I'm hearing it all the time in our clients and the coaches and the coaching work that we're doing. And so it's the same thing. It is getting aligned around what they're willing to do and not do, and making and understanding they may have the capability of keeping 80% of that commitment. And so you set up a monthly meeting to review, right? How you build good teams in business is the same way that you build good relationships in families and in our personal. Same thing, right? But we don't do that because we think that sounds too business-like. I don't want to have a meeting with my partner. Right? But it's like, important. No, that, you can call it whatever you want. Call it date night, call it monthly review, call it connection time, which is what I call it, right? We're going to have a connection time and we're going to go out and talk about and these are the two prompts that we use in the work in G3 and in SuperLoop is what's working for you and what's not working. Right. It's not what I like, what I don't like. It's not what's good and bad, yum, yuck. It's not it's not a judgment. It is, this works for me and this doesn't work for me. So can we do something different? And understanding that, watching our language, like language creates. So when you use words that people are going to internalize as a judgment, they're going to connect it to shame, and being mindful of that and staying with curious questions is some of the best work that we can do in our own relationship and love.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that. This has been so insightful. And I'm sure there's a lot of, a lot of our listeners are going to get a lot of information and tips and suggestions. So if anybody wants to reach out to you to work with, the coaching or just have a conversation with you or just get maybe some kind of suggestions on how they can support their spouses or their children, what would be the best way to reach you?
They can reach us on our G3 Works website. There's a place to sign up if you want more information. The website is the letter G, the number 3, works, WORKS.com. And they can sign up there and they can schedule something with me or they can schedule something with one of our team members and we'll help them decide how to do it.
Perfect. Well, we'll have all that in the show notes. So thank you so much for all of this information. And I truly appreciate you, spending your time here and giving us all this golden nuggets. So thank you so much.
Sure. Congratulations on your 50th episode. I get to celebrate that work. That's good work.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's all possible because of my beautiful guests and people like you saying yes and sharing your experiences so we can build a better place for our community and our younger generation. Exactly. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you as well. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
You're so welcome. As we conclude our inspiring conversation with Susan, remember that true transformation begins with consciousness and commitment to something greater than ourselves. If you're ready to share your transformation story through a website that reflects your mission to change the world, I'd love to help create that digital platform through custom Squarespace or WordPress websites. This is Anisha Jennings reminding you that sometimes our greatest impact comes from operationalizing our deepest values. Until next time.